Okay, welcome back. We're on page 856 talking about, okay, it's time for you to contact your service provider, or if you're doing it yourself, and try to figure out where's the weak link. Is it the connection here? Is it the web server? Is it the dynamic content? Is it database content? Where is the weak link, right? Where do I add more, another network card? Do I add more memory because this is chewing up more memory, or I need a faster disk because of this? You just have to go through the whole thing. So horizontal scaling is going wide, so to speak. Wide means I have multiple web servers. I perhaps only have one data server, and this would probably be a SAN connection. You remember why SAN? Because the SAN would allow me to have multiple servers and all connect to the same machine without causing any issues. So this is my storage web, okay? And these are my 4 or 3 web servers, and I have some sort of a network appliance, typically, as my load balancer. So the load balancer is the traffic cop. It's the one that says, hey, this guy's not doing very much. The next time somebody asks for something, I'm going to send it to this guy. Okay, so it keeps track of, it could be something simple, like how much memory is being used or how much CPU is being used. I even had a scenario, it wasn't a web server, but we could tell that the router was being overloaded by how hot it got. And so actually we used temperature to determine if something was being used a lot. I know, it's kind of crazy. Okay, vertical scaling on the other hand, I have one server that does the web page generation stuff, another for the back end, the logic, and another one for the database. That's the typical 3-tier application. It's basically this, it just doesn't have these 2 wings on it. So web server, some sort of content, and then some sort of a database. And so this would allow, this is good, a 3-tier architecture is good, because it allows you to isolate the individual pieces and say, okay, am I having problems with the back end, the web, the database part? Okay, am I having trouble with the I'll go ahead and use the word CGI, but I'm having trouble with the ASP.NET stuff or the Python stuff. Or is it just, I'm just not having enough internet pipe. My pipe is not big enough. So, it very easily allow you to figure out which one is the weak link and then upgrade it independently, right? You don't have to go in and do anything else. In fact, they don't recommend that you do multiple things at once, right? Okay, good. All right. So, choosing a method on page 858, static versus dynamic versus database. Progressively add more CPU or RAM. Okay. Sometimes determine the component that is most loaded. And of course, again, don't do this all at once. Add more CPU or RAM here. Add more CPU or RAM here. Just incrementally. Don't do everything at once. Okay. Good. So let me just tell you a story. So in the early days of the Obamacare thing, the government contracted with a company to produce the AKA website, right? And they guessed the number of users wrong by a huge margin. And so it couldn't scale fast enough. When everyone tried to log on, the system crashed and no one could get to their insurance website. So they had to turn right around and do this big time, add more machines, go wide, go deep. Okay. So yeah, these things do happen. Okay. On page 859, they talk about the security part. So the most prominent location where people from the internet touch your system is at the web server. That's where it could be right, because 99% of the use of the web server is somebody from the internet, right? It's not inside your own LAN, right? Okay, just saying. So when outsiders touch, that's where you're going to have security issues. So it's always best to separate your web server from everything else in your system. So if you have an on-premises web server, okay, you have a demilitarized zone, a semi-trusted zone, where input comes in from the internet and it does not leave the DMZ. You can get to the website, okay, but you can't see my machine or my other servers or anything. You can't see my domain controller. You can't see anything. All you can see is those specific things I want you to be able to see. Okay. So technically, you want to keep any sensitive data away from your web server. So for example, since your web server is being exposed, I don't want to keep credit card data on my web server. Now, is it okay to keep credit card data over here? Yeah, because people from the internet cannot directly connect to my database server. They don't even know it exists. They don't know its name. They can connect to the web server. Now, the web server knows it exists, and the web server knows its name, but people on the outside can't see that. So just to add just a tiny, tiny bit of layer of protection, store your credit card information and user data on a database server that is not directly connected to the internet. Okay, good. Then you have to worry about somebody, using pirated software or posting stuff on your machine, using it for spam, pulling your email addresses, using your website as a bot. Lots of other things that could happen. So it's very tempting to move this kind of stuff to the cloud because it is kind of sensitive and I really want to keep it separate. So why not just take the whole thing and send it off to the cloud? Let somebody else deal with that. Does that work well? Actually, yeah, it's not bad. Having an Azure website or if you were to do it that way or just with a hosting provider, right? No big deal. It's typically going to be software as a service. In other words, it's just, you don't install the operating system. You don't install IIS or Apache. Okay, all they do is say, okay, here's your web, upload your content. That's it. It's just like, just like a Word document. You don't install Microsoft Word. You just provide the content for Word. Same thing here, okay? So let's talk about internal website because, yeah, those still exist. So there's a bullet list on page 860 that basically talks about the things that, viruses basically start with email, okay? That's basically where most viruses start. And so you have to be paying attention to that. Internal sites may contain privileged information that require authentication to view. Okay, now I would never do this. Oh, I'm sorry, intranet. Sorry, intranet. In other words, this is a website that normal people can't get to, and so but when you got there, you'd have to be prompted. Just like when you go to campus, right? It's a normal website, but you have to put in your credentials. If you're not a student, you're not going to be able to see the class schedules. Okay, sorry. Visitors, temps, contractors will be able to access your website from a conference room. Ugh, okay. If your network is compromised, either by malicious or accident, some person might set up a wireless access point, right, inside your building and then be able to go in and do stuff. Security and reliability go hand in hand. Yeah. Some security patches or configuration might do an excellent job of protecting, but could make things mess up. Okay. So let's go back to page 860 talking about secure socket layer. Okay, I know. Look, I've already said that a gazillion times, but let's just keep going. Let me give you a little history. So this was a Netscape thing back in the early days of the browser wars. You had internet information, you had IE and you had Netscape. And Netscape was a good company and they came up with all sorts of, they're the ones that came up with JavaScript. They're the ones that came up with this SSL thing. So it was a Netscape thing, and they took it to the standards committee and said, "Hey, we're ready to come up with SSL version 4." And the standards committee said, "Yeah, but didn't you put a copyright on that term?" And they went, "Well, yeah." They said, "Well, you can't have a copyrighted term in a standard." And they went, "Oh, okay." So they changed its name to Transport Layer Security, so TLS. So SSL4 essentially is TLS1, okay? So now it's no longer being maintained by Netscape, it's being maintained by the World Wide Web Consortium. Actually, maybe this one is the task force guy. Don't know. Anyway, bottom line is the older versions of SSL through SSL3 are no longer being used. Not even TLS 1.0 and 1.1 and So I'm going to do a thing here that I'm going to go see how well my browser is currently configured with regard to that. So I've typed in this thing. It's from SSL Labs. It says, okay, your user agent is good protocol. I'm using TLS 1.2 and 1.3, which is currently what's recommended. I'm okay with this curveball. I'm okay with this vulnerability. I'm okay with this vulnerability. Here's the ones that I accept. I no longer accept SSL2, R3, R1, or 1.1. I do accept these guys. And then what type of encryption do I accept? Okay. Okay. All right. Protocol, do I support server name? Almost everyone does. Come on. You know, TLS compression, blah, 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 blah. So anyway, this is a cool way to verify that you're actually okay. Now, I will tell you that the machines at the office are still supporting some older versions of SSL, which is not a good thing. Okay, let's continue. So TLS, I said it right this time, requires a certificate of some sort. And a certificate is a chain of trust. So I need to know that these guys, like this guy right here, is a legitimate company. So I'm just going to say, it says, you know, permissions and what type of stuff. It has a valid certificate issued by a trusting authority. Now, what that basically means is I just can't have a certificate signed by me. And then you go, well, it's digitally signed, but it's signed by nobody you've never heard of, so you don't trust me. The only way you can do this is if you have a certificate authority that you do trust. And so it's a chain of trust. I trust Bob, Bob trusts Sally, therefore I trust Sally. That's the way this thing is designed to work. Okay. So there's two parts to a certificate. There's a private key and a public key, and I'm not going to get into all the encryption kind of thing, but I'm just saying there's parts to this thing, and you could store this. So basically, you don't store the private key on the web server at all. I mean, you need the private key, but you don't ever store the thing that created the SSL certificate, okay? You don't store it on the machine where it's being used. Obviously, you need it to be able to create it, but how many times do you create one? You know, every couple of years when it expires? Okay, that's nothing. Okay. So there's another bullet list here. It talks about, here's the way you can do this thing. Isolated storage. Sites with extremely high security store the key on a USB stick, and only when needed. That's a cool way. Encrypted storage. Okay, well, maybe you can store the key in an NFS encrypted folder. Network accessible key repository, and then protected files. Okay, you know, so just set the permission so no one else can see. So most people, of course, would have it separate. That would probably be the right way to do it. Okay, SSL does more than just encrypt the traffic. It basically tells you that you are, who you say you are, and it has the ability to do the reverse. It could prove that the client is who it says it is. I mean, that's kind of stupid because no one is attesting to who they are, but that capability exists. Okay, one more time. So why would a self-signed certificate not work here? What if I asked you that in a test question? Could you noodle that out in your head and tell me why? Okay, good. Okay, so based upon the site name, you know, typically a domain name, you know, like www.kumquat.com. So what happens if I change my name? Do I have to get a new certificate? Yeah. What if I change my IP address? Do I have to get a new certificate? Yeah. Do I have to pay for it a second time? Probably not. Okay. So protecting web server applications on page 862. You know, they have the HTTP service itself, and then you have these plug-in modules that add extra things to it. For example, the old CGI thing. I mean, for example, I need the .NET framework in order to have my stuff running, so I need this goofy thing called, you know, Active Server Pages, ASP.NET. And so I have to install more stuff. So now my web service is getting a little bit more complicated, and the security behind that is getting a little bit more complicated because every time I add a component, a plug-in module, now I have to keep track of all this stuff. Okay, doggone it, we're coming up on the 15-minute mark.